Stand up. Walk to any doorframe in your house and reach both hands to the top of it. Now lift your feet. Let your body weight pull you toward the floor. Hold it for 5 seconds. Feel that, the stretch spreading through your shoulders, the tug running down each side of your spine, the slow separation of vertebrae that have been pressed together since you sat down this morning. Something just opened that has been closed for hours. You felt it in the space between the bones of your lower back. A release that arrived not from a pill, not from a foam roller, not from anything you purchased, but from the oldest force in the universe, doing the one thing modern life never lets it do to your spine. What happened inside your body in those 5 seconds is the beginning of a reversal of a mechanical process that has been compressing, shortening, and dehydrating your tissues for every hour you have spent in a chair today. The physics of why it works begins not in your back, not in your shoulders, but in a structure you have probably never thought about. It is sitting right now between the bones of your spine, and it is thirsty. Your spine is not a rigid pole. It is a tower of 33 bones stacked on top of each other, and between 23 pairs of those bones sits a disc. Each disc is roughly the diameter of a small coaster and about 1 centimeter thick. It has 2 components. The outer wall is called the annulus fibrosus, a series of concentric rings made from collagen fibers arranged in alternating diagonal layers, like the plies of a radial tire. 15 to 25 layers of these fibers wrap around each other at opposing angles, creating a structure that can resist compression, tension, and torsion simultaneously. Inside that wall sits the nucleus pulposus, a gel composed mostly of water bound to large molecules called proteoglycans. Those proteoglycans carry a strong negative electrical charge that attracts and holds water molecules in place, creating an internal hydraulic pressure that keeps the disc inflated and the vertebrae apart. Think of it as a pressurized cushion. The outer wall resists bursting. The inner gel resists collapsing. Together, they distribute your body weight evenly across the surface of each vertebral end plate, absorb shock when you walk or jump, and permit the small rotations and bends that let you twist to check a blind spot or lean down to tie your shoes. Here is the detail that changes everything about how you think about your spine. The intervertebral disc is the largest avascular structure in the human body. It has no blood supply. None. Not a single capillary penetrates the nucleus pulposus at any point in adult life. The cells at the center of your lumbar discs, the cells responsible for producing and maintaining the entire matrix that holds those discs together, sit 6 to 8 millimeters from the nearest blood vessel. Every molecule of oxygen and glucose those cells need to survive must diffuse inward through the cartilaginous end plates, the thin layers of hyaline cartilage that cap the top and bottom of each disc like 2 thin ceramic plates capping a hydraulic cylinder. Every molecule of lactic acid waste those cells produce must diffuse back out through the same route. Jill Urban at the University of Oxford demonstrated in a series of studies spanning 3 decades that the nutrient concentration inside a healthy disc forms steep gradients. Oxygen and glucose levels are highest at the margins, close to the blood vessels in the vertebral body, and lowest at the center of the nucleus pulposus, where lactic acid concentration is greatest. The actual levels depend on the balance between diffusive transport and cellular demand. If that transport is disrupted by any mechanism, if the end plate calcifies, if the disc is chronically compressed, if blood flow to the vertebral body margins decreases, nutrient delivery falls below the threshold needed to keep the cells alive. When those cells die, no new cells replace them. The matrix they maintain begins to degrade. The disc loses its hydraulic properties. It desiccates, narrows, and fails. The disc is a structure that survives by breathing, and sitting is the posture that holds its breath. When you sit in a standard office chair, your hips flex to approximately 90 degrees. Your lumbar spine, which in standing holds a gentle inward curve called lordosis, flattens or reverses into a slight outward curve. This changes the distribution of compressive force on each lumbar disc, concentrating load on the posterior portion of the annulus and altering the pressure environment of the nucleus. Alf Nachemson at the University of Gothenburg was the first to measure this directly. Beginning in 1959 and continuing through the late 1970s, Nachemson inserted pressure transducers into the lumbar discs of over 100 living volunteers and recorded intradiscal pressure across dozens of postures and activities. His findings, published across multiple papers including a landmark 1981 review in the journal Spine, became one of the most cited datasets in the history of spinal biomechanics. Compared with the pressure measured during relaxed standing, unsupported sitting increased the compressive load on the third lumbar disc by approximately 40%. Leaning forward while sitting, the posture of every person hunched over an email pushed the increase past 100%. Forward flexion with rotation, the posture of reaching for a file drawer while twisted in a chair, produced pressure 400% higher than standing. Nearly 4 decades later, in 1999, Hans-Joachim Wilck at the University of Ulm repeated and extended Nachemson's work using a smaller and more precise telemetric pressure transducer implanted in the disc between the 4th and 5th lumbar vertebrae of a 45-year-old male volunteer weighing 70 kilograms. The transducer measured pressure continuously over 24 hours across lying, sitting, standing, walking, jogging, sneezing, laughing, and lifting. Published in the journal Spine, Wilck's measurements confirmed the overall pressure hierarchy. Relaxed standing produced 0.5 megapascals. Lying prone registered 0.1. Sitting unsupported measured 0.46 megapascals, which was slightly lower than standing in this particular subject, a finding that generated significant debate. But sitting with maximum forward flexion, the posture of bending over to tie shoes, pushed the pressure to 0.83 megapascals. And standing bent forward at the waist reached 1.1 megapascals, more than double the standing baseline. A comprehensive literature review published in 2023 in the journal PeerJ, synthesizing intradiscal pressure data from Nachemson, Wilke, Sato, Schultz, and others, calculated the relative intradiscal pressure of upright sitting compared to upright standing. The ratio ranged from 1.24, measured by Sato, Kikuchi, and Yonezawa in 1999, to 1.45, derived from Nachemson's later measurements. The conclusion held. Sitting loads the lumbar spine measurably and consistently more than standing. Now hold that load for 8 hours. 9 hours. The average American adult sits 9.5 hours per day, substantially more than previous generations. Under sustained compression, the nucleus pulposus loses water. The proteoglycans are squeezed like a sponge, fluid is pushed out through the end plates, and the disc height decreases measurably. You are shorter at the end of the day than when you woke up. Studies using precision stadiometry have measured stature losses of up to 2 centimeters over a single waking period, with the majority of that loss occurring in the lumbar intervertebral discs. That water loss is not simply a cosmetic change in height. It is a change in the internal nutritional environment of the disc. When the disc is compressed and dehydrated, the diffusion distance between the end plate capillaries and the central cells increases. The concentration gradient of oxygen and glucose flattens. Cellular metabolism continues at the center of the nucleus, consuming whatever glucose remains and producing lactic acid. But the supply line has been squeezed thinner. The pH drops. The environment becomes hostile to the very cells responsible for synthesizing and maintaining the proteoglycan matrix that gives the disc its ability to hold water in the first place. A vicious cycle. Compression drives out water. Water loss impairs nutrition. Impaired nutrition kills cells. Dead cells stop maintaining the matrix. The matrix degrades. The disc loses the ability to attract water. More water is lost. Now here is the part that most people never hear. The disc is designed to lose water during the day and regain it at night. That cycle is not a flaw. It is the mechanism by which the disc feeds itself. When you stand, walk, and compress the disc during the day, fluid is pushed outward through the end plates. When you lie down at night and the compression drops, osmotic pressure draws fluid back in. That returning fluid carries dissolved glucose and oxygen with it. The loading and unloading cycle is the disc's circulatory system. Compression followed by decompression. Exhale followed by inhale. Sean Williams at York College, City University of New York, reviewed the literature on disc rehydration and described this mechanism using the term imbibition, the process by which a porous material absorbs fluid when external pressure is removed. Repetitive cycles of traction followed by compression produce imbibition and osmosis of water back into the disc, rehydrating the nucleus and restoring disc height. The disc does not simply need rest. It needs the alternation between load and release. It needs a pump. Sitting for 9 hours provides the compression half of that cycle in excess. It provides virtually none of the decompression half. The pump runs in one direction. The disc exhales all day and never inhales. By the time you lie down at night, the nucleus is so dehydrated and the end plate diffusion gradient so flat that the overnight recovery is incomplete. The deficit accumulates. Day after day, year after year. The disc that was 90% water at age 20 is 60% water at age 60. The cushion has dried out. Hanging reverses the vector. When you suspend your body weight from an overhead bar, the gravitational load shifts from compression to traction. The vertebrae are pulled apart. The intradiscal pressure drops towards zero, or in some estimates below zero. The osmotic pressure of the proteoglycans, still carrying their negative charge, still hungry for water, is no longer opposed by compressive force. Fluid is drawn in. The disc inhales. The disc is not just being squashed, it is being starved. And the compression cascade does not remain confined to the disc. The sustained seated posture simultaneously triggers a second mechanical process, one that operates not through hydraulic pressure, but through the adaptive remodeling of the muscles anchored directly to the lumbar vertebrae. When you sit, your hip flexors are held in a shortened position. The primary hip flexor is the iliopsoas, and it is unlike any other muscle in the human body. The psoas major originates from the lateral surfaces of the vertebral bodies from the 12th thoracic through the 4th lumbar vertebra. It threads forward through the abdominal cavity, crosses the brim of the pelvis, and inserts on the lesser trochanter of the femur. It is the only muscle in the body that directly connects the lumbar spine to the leg. Its anatomical name comes from the Greek psoas, meaning of the loins. Some anatomy texts refer to it as the filet mignon of the human body. The same cut of meat served in expensive restaurants is the psoas of a cow. When you sit at 90 degrees of hip flexion, the psoas is slack. It is resting at its shortest functional length, and skeletal muscle adapts to the length at which it is habitually held. This is a well-documented property of muscle physiology. When a muscle is maintained in a shortened position for extended periods, the number of sarcomeres arranged in series within the muscle fibers decreases, and the connective tissue within and around the muscle stiffens. The muscle literally remodels itself to become shorter. This is the same mechanism that allows stretching to increase flexibility, operating in reverse. Stephen Preece at the University of Salford examined 144 individuals in a cross-sectional study published in Musculoskeletal Science and Practice in 2021. Using the modified Thomas test to measure passive hip extension and the Global Physical Activity Questionnaire to quantify sitting behaviors, Preece found that people who sat more than 7 hours per day and were physically inactive had significantly less passive hip extension than those who sat fewer than 4 hours and met the physical activity threshold of 150 minutes per week. This was the first study to demonstrate a direct association between prolonged sitting, physical inactivity, and measurable loss of hip flexor length. The authors concluded that the findings may indicate a physiological adaptation in passive muscle stiffness. A separate investigation published in the Indian Journal of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation examined 46 desk job workers who had been sitting more than 5 hours per day for at least 5 years. The researchers measured iliopsoas muscle length using the modified Thomas test and lumbar lordosis using a flexi ruler. They found a moderate positive correlation between iliopsoas muscle shortness and increased lumbar lordosis. The Pearson correlation coefficient was 0.628 on the right side and 0.647 on the left. Workers with tighter hip flexors had more exaggerated lumbar curves. The bridge back to the spine is anatomical and direct. The psoas attaches to the lumbar vertebrae. When it shortens and stiffens from years of sitting, it does not simply tilt the pelvis forward into what clinicians call anterior pelvic tilt. It pulls the lumbar spine into hyperextension whenever you stand or walk. That hyperextension shifts the loading pattern on the posterior elements of the vertebrae, particularly the facet joints, and it redistributes pressure across the disc surface unevenly. The anterior portion of the disc unloads. The posterior portion overloads. The annular fibers on the back side of the disc, already the thinnest section of the annular wall, bear a disproportionate share of compressive and shear forces. Two forces converging on the same tissue. Compression pushing down from above, hour after hour. Muscular pull dragging forward from below, year after year. The posterior annulus caught between them. This is the geometry that precedes disc bulging, disc protrusion, and disc herniation. And it compounds further still, because the damage from sitting does not stop at the lumbar spine. It propagates upward through the thoracic cage and into the shoulders, triggering a third cascade that modern orthopedics has been correcting surgically for decades at significant expense. When you sit with arms forward, typing or holding a phone, the pectoral muscles shorten, the scapulae slide forward around the rib cage, and the thoracic spine rounds into increased flexion, a postural state called kyphosis. The muscles of the posterior shoulder, the rotator cuff complex, and the lower trapezius are placed under chronic stretch. They lengthen and weaken. The subacromial space, the narrow corridor between the superior aspect of the humeral head and the bony shelf of the acromion, through which the supraspinatus tendon and the subacromial bursa must pass, narrows. The tendon and the bursa are pinched. This is subacromial impingement syndrome, and it is one of the most common shoulder diagnoses in people over 40. John Kirsch, an orthopedic surgeon in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, spent 25 years studying this narrowing. His research, conducted at the Kirsch Institute for Shoulder Research and presented at the combined Australian and American Hand and Upper Extremity Societies meeting in Kauai, Hawaii, followed 92 patients with chronic shoulder pain. 70 had been diagnosed with subacromial impingement syndrome. Others had rotator cuff tears and frozen shoulder. Many had been told by their surgeons that acromioplasty, a procedure in which a portion of the acromion bone is surgically shaved to widen the subacromial corridor, was their best option. The surgery typically costs several $1,000s, requires general anesthesia, and is followed by months of rehabilitation. Kirsch prescribed one intervention: hanging from an overhead bar. Using computed tomography scans taken before and after sustained periods of regular hanging, Kirsch documented that the hanging position engaged a functional joint he named the acromiohumeral joint. When the arms are overhead and the body hangs, the humeral head levers against the underside of the acromion, bending this thin shelf of bone upward and widening the subacromial space. The coracoacromial ligament, the fibrous band that forms the roof of the subacromial corridor, stretches under the sustained tensile load. Over weeks and months of regular hanging, the architecture of the shoulder opens. The biomechanics are consistent with established physiology. The lateral acromion is a thin shelf of cortical bone subject to remodeling under sustained mechanical load, governed by the same Wolff's law that shapes all bone in the human skeleton. Bone is a living tissue. It adds material where force is applied and removes material where force is absent. The coracoacromial ligament, like every ligament in the body, undergoes viscoelastic creep under sustained tension, gradually elongating over repeated loading cycles. Kirsch reported that the majority of his 92 patients returned to pain-free shoulder function without surgery, without medication, and without conventional physical therapy. The force that opened their shoulders was the same force that had been closing them for years. Gravity. Redirected. Now observe how the shoulder and the spine connect through the dead, hang in a single anatomical chain. The latissimus dorsi, the broadest muscle of the back, originates along the spinous processes from the 7th thoracic vertebra through the 5th lumbar vertebra across the posterior iliac crest and inserts on the intertubercular groove of the humerus just below the shoulder. When you hang, the lats are placed under maximal stretch. The humeral attachment is pulled upward by your grip on the bar. The spinal attachments are pulled downward by the weight of your body. The muscle acts as a cable that connects the upper arm to the lower spine. As it elongates, the vertebrae to which it is anchored are drawn apart. The same stretch that opens the shoulder simultaneously decompresses the spine. One posture, two mechanical corrections. And there is a fourth consequence of the dead hang that connects this simple movement to a data set so large and so unexpected that it forced cardiologists to rethink how they assess the risk of death. When you hang from a bar, your fingers must close around the metal with enough force to support your entire body weight. The flexor digitorum profundus, the flexor digitorum superficialis, and the intrinsic muscles of the hand fire isometrically and continuously for the duration of the hang. This is grip strength training in its most elemental form. Darrell Leong at the Population Health Research Institute in Hamilton, Ontario, published a study in The Lancet in 2015 that changed the way clinicians think about a handshake. The prospective urban-rural epidemiology study, known as PURE, enrolled 142,861 participants from 17 countries spanning low, middle, and high-income economies. 139,691 with known vital status were included in the analysis. Grip strength was measured using a Jamar dynamometer. Outcomes tracked over a median follow-up of 4 years included all-cause mortality, cardiovascular mortality, non-cardiovascular mortality, myocardial infarction, and stroke. The results were blunt. Every 5-kilogram reduction in grip strength was associated with a 16% increase in the risk of death from any cause, a 17% increase in cardiovascular death, a 7% increase in the risk of heart attack, a 9% increase in the risk of stroke. All associations persisted after statistical adjustment for age, sex, education, employment status, physical activity level, tobacco use, and alcohol consumption. Grip strength was a stronger predictor of all-cause and cardiovascular mortality than systolic blood pressure. A measurement taken in 30 seconds with a $40 device outperformed the blood pressure cuff that has anchored clinical practice for a century. The mechanism connecting grip to mortality is not fully resolved. Leong and colleagues proposed that grip strength functions as a composite biomarker, a single measurement that reflects the health of multiple physiological systems simultaneously, including cardiovascular fitness, metabolic function, hormonal status, and the integrity of the neuromuscular system. A weak grip does not cause a heart attack, but the decline in muscular capacity that produces a weak grip is the same decline that precedes cardiovascular failure. The grip is a window into a deeper architecture of resilience. The dead hang trains grip. The grip predicts survival. The causal chain between training and survival has not been established in a randomized trial. But the association endpoints are measured, replicated, and published in one of the most demanding medical journals on the planet. This is the section that separates this channel from channels that sell you certainty. The disc compression evidence from Nachemson and Wilke is the bedrock of this argument, measured directly in living spines, replicated across independent groups, extended with complementary methods including spinal fixator load measurements and stadiometry, confirmed across more than 60 years of investigation. The relationship between sustained sitting, elevated intradiscal pressure, impaired disc nutrition, and accelerated disc degeneration is one of the most robust and well-supported findings in all of spinal biomechanics. Confidence level, high. The hip flexor adaptation mechanism is physiologically consistent, supported by direct cross-sectional measurement in relevant populations, and anatomically coherent in its connection to lumbar loading. But the full causal chain, from hours of sitting to sarcomere loss in the psoas to altered vertebral loading to disc failure, has not been established by a single longitudinal study tracking each step. The individual links are measured. The complete sequence is modeled. Confidence level, moderate. The Kirsch shoulder work is the most preliminary piece of this argument. 92 patients. No control group. No published peer-reviewed data. No randomized comparison. The anatomy is sound. The biomechanical reasoning is coherent. But clinical medicine demands more than coherence. It demands controlled comparison. Until that comparison exists, the shoulder mechanism remains an informed hypothesis supported by case observation, not a demonstrated therapy. Confidence level, early stage. The Lyon grip strength data is epidemiologically powerful. Nearly 140,000 participants, 17 countries, published in The Lancet. The association between declining grip and rising mortality risk is not in doubt. What has not been demonstrated is whether training grip through hanging or any other method causally reduces the risk of death. The relationship may be a reflection of underlying health status rather than a modifiable input. Confidence level. Strong for association, uncertain for intervention. Calibrate your expectations to match the evidence. There is a commercial version of what your body weight does when it hangs from a bar. It is called non-surgical spinal decompression therapy. The most prominent device is the VAX-D table, short for vertebral axial decompression, patented in the early 1990s and marketed to chiropractors and pain management clinics across the United States. A patient lies face down on a two-part motorized table, strapped into a pelvic harness. A computerized motor applies precisely calibrated cycles of distraction and relaxation, gradually separating the lumbar vertebrae to generate negative intradiscal pressure. Ramos and Martin, publishing in the Journal of Neurosurgery in 1994, inserted pressure transducers into the discs of 5 patients during VAX-D treatment and measured intradiscal pressures reaching negative 160 millimeters of mercury. At that pressure, the disc interior functions as a vacuum, generating a suction force sufficient to draw displaced nuclear material back toward the center of the annulus. A full course of VAX-D treatment involves 15 to 25 sessions, each lasting 30 to 45 minutes, typically delivered 3 to 5 times per week, over 4 to 8 weeks. The total cost runs between $1,000 and $5,000 out of pocket. Insurance companies, including Aetna, classify the treatment as experimental and investigational. Medicare does not cover it. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, in a 2007 technology assessment, concluded that the evidence was too limited in both quality and quantity to support evidence-based conclusions about efficacy compared to other non-surgical options. But the underlying physics is not in dispute. What the VAX-D table does is apply axial traction to the lumbar spine in a controlled, cycled pattern to reduce intradiscal pressure and promote fluid re-entry into the nucleus. What a dead hang does is apply axial traction to the lumbar spine using constant gravitational load. The molecular target is the same. The direction of force is the same. The intended outcome, decompression of the disc space, restoration of fluid diffusion gradients, and widening of the neural foramen, is identical in principle. The dose is not equivalent. The clinical version is more precise. It offers computer-monitored force application, variable ramp rates, cycled loading and unloading, and real-time feedback. The dead hang is a blunt instrument. A constant load, no cycling, no monitoring. The comparison is between a scalpel and a kitchen knife. Both cut. One is designed for surgery. But the kitchen knife costs between $20 and $40, installs in a door frame in under 2 minutes, and requires no appointment. Gravity has no billing department. Consider the person who is 57 years old and has worked at a desk for 30 years, who commutes 45 minutes each way, sitting in a car, who eats lunch at the desk, who comes home and sits on the sofa for another 2 hours in the evening. Add it up. 11 hours of hip flexion per day. 330 days per year. For 3 decades. That is over 100,000 hours of sustained compression across a working lifetime. This person stands up from the chair at the end of the day and feels a deep, familiar stiffness in the lower back that takes 3 or 4 steps to walk out. It used to disappear by the time they reach the kitchen. Now it lingers through dinner. Whose morning routine now includes a few minutes of cautious stretching that did not used to be necessary. Who has noticed, gradually and then suddenly, that reaching overhead has become difficult. Placing a suitcase in the overhead bin on a plane. Changing a light bulb on the ceiling fixture. Lifting a grandchild above the head. Movements that used to be invisible, performed without a thought, now accompanied by a grinding sensation in the front of the shoulder and a dull ache that lingers into the night and wakes them at 3 in the morning when they roll onto that side. Who went to the doctor for that shoulder and was told the MRI shows a type 2 acromion, mild tendinosis of the supraspinatus, and subacromial impingement. That physical therapy should be tried first, but if the pain persists, acromioplasty is an option. This person has been compressed from above for 3 decades. Their psoas has shortened centimeter by centimeter, year after year. Their thoracic spine has rounded forward into a gentle hunch they do not notice until they see themselves in a photograph. Their subacromial space has narrowed by fractions of a millimeter. Their lumbar discs have been losing water faster than they can reabsorb it, the proteoglycan matrix thinning, the end plate calcifying, the nutrient supply degrading in a slow spiral that no single day of sitting caused, but 30 years of sitting compounded. The architecture of their skeleton has been remodeled by the sustained absence of one movement pattern that every other great ape on the planet still performs daily. Reaching overhead and hanging. Gorillas hang. Chimpanzees hang. Orangutans hang. Gibbons spend the majority of their waking lives suspended by their arms, brachiating from branch to branch, their entire skeletal structure shaped by millions of years of overhead suspension. Their shoulders do not impinge, their spines do not compress into degenerative disease at the rates observed in Homo sapiens. Their discs are loaded and unloaded in rapid alternation as they swing, land, hang, and swing again. The pump cycles continuously. The discs breathe. The human shoulder retains the anatomy of a brachiator. The ball and socket joint, the shallow glenoid fossa, the long clavicle, the laterally oriented scapula, all of it was shaped for overhead suspension and arm-swinging locomotion. We inherited the hardware. We stopped running the software. The subacromial space that narrows in a 57-year-old office worker is the same space that remains open in a 40-year-old orangutan who hangs from branches every day. The difference is not genetics. The difference is use. Humans are the 5th great ape, and the only one that stopped hanging. Your grandmother did not own a pull-up bar, but she had a clothesline. She reached overhead every morning to pin the laundry, arms extended past her ears, shoulders open, lifting wet sheets that weighed several kilograms and draping them across a line that sat above her head. She loaded her grip on the wooden pins. She opened her subacromial space with every reach. She elongated her spine against gravity without ever once thinking of it as therapy or exercise. She also did not sit for 9.5 hours a day. Go outside and hang from the monkey bars. She might have said that to a child who complained of a stiff back or a sore shoulder. 7 words.
The molecular translation of those 7 words is axial spinal decompression via gravitational traction, concurrent glenohumeral distraction with coracoacromial ligament elongation, bilateral iliopsoas stretch under gravitational load through full hip extension, latissimus dorsi lengthening with secondary thoracic and lumbar vertebral separation, and sustained isometric grip training of the forearm flexor chain, a variable that is inversely correlated with all-cause and cardiovascular mortality in 139,691 adults across 17 countries as published in The Lancet.
She said it in 7 words. The mechanism takes 5,000. Find a bar. Grip it. Lift your feet. Hang.